Hello and welcome to Hop Along Studio. So in today's video, I'm going to share with you about how you can make a fold-up mini book using just one piece of paper. So let's get started. So let's talk about the dimensions of our piece of paper. We're doing a piece of paper that's 12 inches by 9 inches in size. And what I'm going to do is just flip it on over, and you want to fold it in half, like so. And once you have that line, I usually just crease it with my fingers. And then what I do is I actually take a bone folder and I run the bone folder along the top of the piece of paper. And now I'm going to actually take the piece of paper and fold it in the other direction. So you'll end up with kind of a plus crease on your piece of paper. And you just want to take a bone folder and crease it again. And then what you want to do is want to fold it the opposite way. You don't want, where this here you have a valley crease where you can see that it has this type of movement. With the crease down the center, you want to make sure that you're actually creasing in a way that it doesn't really have a memory. You want to have your piece of paper that is now in 4, and taking the long end, you want to basically fold it in so that basically you're creating 8s with your piece of paper. And I'm actually going to do the other side as well. Just fold it to that center line, crease. And now what you want to do is actually take it and fold it the other way. Again, you want a more neutral fold on this. You don't want a hill or valley. You just want a straight fold. And this is where a bone fold is really good, especially if you're using thick paper, like this piece of paper. That's what I love about the Wild Whisper paper. It is very thick and it actually will hold up to making into a book really easily. If you fold the piece of paper in half, from basically from the 2 outer folds in, right along here, we're actually going to cut a line. And to cut my line, I'm actually going to be using a steel rule and an X-Acto knife on a cutting mat. So make sure you don't end up wrecking your silicone mats doing this. And you should see it separate like so. So now when you look at your piece of paper, you'll notice that there's kind of a gap in the center here. And so what you do is, if you go like so, you'll notice it has a bit of like a diamond shape. And you just want to press it in. And there's your book. So since that was a lot of steps, let's just recap. So basically you took your piece of 9 by 12 paper, you folded it in half this way. You opened it back up. You folded it in half in the other direction. Then you opened it back up and you folded it in 8s along the long side. And you folded those in both directions just so that it wouldn't have a hill or valley. Then you basically flipped it back over and you cut out a line along the center section here so that when you stood it up, it created a diamond shape. And from that diamond shape, you were able to create a book by folding it like so. So now that you have your little book, again, if you don't like those little bits of white areas, because the moment you're using a thicker paper for this, you may run into this where the pattern on the paper will sometimes kind of distress it kind of as you fold it. So you can just add in a little bit of ink on the top, and then again, it looks like it's all part of the design instead of being something that really stands out. And I noticed like out the spine here, I think I just was a little harsh with the paper. So I have a choice. I can either just add a little bit of ink like so, or I could also make the choice of just adding a little bit of a binding onto that edge. And I'm actually going to do the same thing to this edge as well. And I think just even edging some of the paper like this is a really nice way of just having a more cohesive design. Instead of using a piece of really nice pattern paper for this, the other option is you use more of a cardstock material, and what that will do is it won't be as strong or as sturdy, but at the same time, you're not going to necessarily get the same issues with the folding lines. That's part of the reason origami paper is as thin as it is the thicker the paper, the more of this you're going to run into. But it's not a big deal. Again, it's a personal preference thing. If it bothers you, try a different piece of paper. Otherwise, run with it. And I personally like the look of this paper, so I'm just running with it, adding my little bit of green and just enjoying it for what it is. So before we move on, I'm just going to add a little bit of tape just within these pages here that are part of that fold, because that way it's going to stay in place a little bit nicer. You don't necessarily have to do that, but it's what I kind of like to do, just so that it kind of has a really clean and tidy look. Just using some souk wing tape for this because it's nice and strong. And that's the thing, is when you're folding a book like this, you're always going to end up with a couple of those folded ends that will need to be adhered together. And this isn't my original idea. I actually saw this book at one of my creative journaling classes. We were actually using them to put haikus and poetry in, or even just some thoughts and writing. And so I'm going to be taking this in a slightly different direction today. I actually wanted to turn this into a little photo book. I have a bunch of my Instax pictures, and I wanted to add them with some of the Well Whisper Designs products to create just a tiny little book of memories. And maybe if you're actually going to tape it, maybe tape it last, because now that I've taped it, it's kind of woggly. So it's, you know what, to be honest, this is the first time I've actually done paper products in this, so we're going to be learning together today. So in this case, I'm going to start with just one of the inner pages. And with this inner page, we don't necessarily need to worry about being across the page, because what I'll do is I will tape this down and then I will fold the page, and that will give us the crease where it needs to be, and that's going to make it a little bit easier than having it as almost a double page layout when we're cutting the paper, because then you have more chances of error in those situations. So we're looking at very small dimensions when we're dealing with this little book. Each page is 3 inches by 4.5 inches. So really all together you have a 6 inch by 4.5 inch spread. So it's not a huge amount of space to work with, but it makes for a really cute little book. This little quote and all these little pieces here are from the Where to Next collection. And actually these tiny little cameras I actually cut out from the cover page that comes with the Where to Next collection. It actually has the strip showing what the paper sample is. And I'm like, those are perfect sizes for adding little cameras to my tiny little book. So again, there's no end to how you can use some of this paper in a lot of different ways. Again, these are those little strips at the bottom of the 12 by 12 pieces of paper, and I'm using them as borders on my page. So I'm just going to assemble this and glue it down, and then we can move on to the next page. So when you're actually creating pages like this, it's nice to mix up some of the things that you're creating with. I like using punches, I like using paper and other things, but it's kind of fun to add photos into your work, try paint. These books can be used for a variety of different things. I did my journaling with my vintage typewriter. My typewriter is, I think, from 1950 something. The particular model that I have was manufactured between the 50s and I think early 60s. So I'm pretty sure this is a 54 or 56 is the age of my typewriter. So it's a wonderful tool to use. I love using my typewriter wherever I can. And this is where I'm folding my page over. Get a nice crease. So you can see that now I'm not going to be fighting that to turn the pages. It's going to just turn really easily by itself. And so yeah, they're wonderful tools. I really love having a vintage typewriter. They're actually fairly simple when you really get down to it. As much as they seem complex, they are a very beautiful tool, and they're pretty easy to fix once you actually know a little bit about them. And so in this case, I want to make sure that my journaling doesn't get in the way of all my little embellishments. I think I'm actually going to add a border on that, probably with a pen, just to add a little bit more variation. And as much as I love art journaling, because I know most of you probably see a lot of the art journaling on my channel here, I do enjoy doing some of these little books and other little projects. I feel like creativity sometimes needs to be mixed up. I find if I stick to one thing too long, I can kind of get caught in a rut. And so by having photography that I can add to my projects, adding paint, adding so many different things, there's no reason you can't mix things up to have a variety of textures and mediums on all your projects. And so I love the different aspects of creative self-care that we have It doesn't have to always be art. It doesn't have to be lots of hours. It can be just a few photos in a fun little book that maybe you keep for yourself or you give to somebody else. There's so many ways that you can use your creativity to just really help yourself and to have these great memories. I have to say that sometimes I take a lot of pictures and I don't always look at them or enjoy them as much as I could, just because I'm always usually so busy. So there's something to be said about turning them into little books and doing little things with them. It can just add a real sense of enjoyment for the things that you create, whether or not that's photography or something else. I'm moving on with some Zots here to add these little cameras. Again, these are the ones I cut out using the front page of the paper. They always throw in one extra sheet. They usually have their cover page and they'll actually have a background. In this case it was planes, but I really love the little cameras, so I really wanted to add them to this layout because I thought they were the perfect dimension for this project. They actually have these technical drawing markers, and I'm just going to go around this edge here. I think I'm just going to use little dots. I'm actually going to go to a bigger pen. This will be a lot faster with a bigger pen. In this case, I got a little clever and actually pre-cut my paper, which now, knowing that I could have just folded the paper, it's totally fine though. There's no reason you can't run with it either way. It might actually work a little bit better to have just a really nice crease in there, just by having a little bit more give on that paper. So in this case, I am going to be adding in another one of my Instax photos, and I actually have all these little penguins. I think I've had this penguin stamp set for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years at this point. It's another local Canadian company, Local King Rubber Stamps, that I actually got this penguin stamps from. So what I do is we want to stamp them with archival ink and just cut them out. In this case, I actually used my brother's scanning cut for cutting out, just because it does save me some time. And I wrote a silly little haiku about penguins that I'm going to add to my page as well. And if you're having issues with your book lying flat because you put down the tape like I did early on, the nice thing about it is you can actually just open it up and lay it flat, and that makes it a little bit easier to work. So things you learn as you create things. Little books are fun to create, and I'm starting to get a lot more into book binding and book making as time goes on, and as I'm figuring things out, I try to share them with you. But it's one of those things where they're super fun, but they do take a little bit of playing around with to figure out what really works and how things work in a way that's really successful. I'm just going to add my little penguins. So yeah, the penguin walk is basically done by the Calgary Zoo, where they actually let the penguins out of the enclosure and you line up along the pathway, and they actually allow you to watch the penguins walk about with their keepers. And it's a really fun event. There's always lots of people. And the one thing they always say is you're not allowed to sit or kneel, because then the penguins will come check you out looking for food. So it's trying to keep them focused on they're going for a walk instead of being distracted by the people. And so it's a pretty awesome event. They do it in February because the weather's really good for the penguins to be able to do their walk. And so I just love being able to be involved in events like this. And it's a great way of doing some photography practice. It's a nice walk. And our zoo's actually been a very safe place to spend time during COVID. And it's so funny watching them walk, because they spend all their time kind of in a group, and they waddle along, and they'll often have the babies in there with them as well. So it's so funny seeing them kind of all interact, and some of them walk slower, some of them walk faster, but it's super cute. And I always get such a kick out of watching the penguins do their walk. And for this page, I couldn't help but do a funny little haiku. Curious penguins looking for fresh fish to eat. Are you food for me? Because that's what it seems like all the time when you're out there. They're looking at you like, do you have food? I did take a little creative journaling class about Japan, and I really enjoyed it, and even started writing a few of my own haikus as things went on. So there we go. So that's our second page. And then for the third one, it's going to add again a little bit more ink along the edge there, because I do want to try to have that not totally stick out. And I used chalk ink for this, or distress ink. I would probably use regular distress ink instead of distress oxide. That will blend in a little bit more and not necessarily give that chalky finish, unless you're looking for that chalky finish. So my book is getting fairly thick as I go, but I don't mind that. In a few weeks, I'm going to show you how you can make a little box for adding a few of these books together. So in that case, if you're trying to store them, they don't end up staying too thick. At the same time, it's what's nice about this one is that it will actually stand up nicely. So if you do want to display it, it's really easy to display. And then I couldn't help but use more of my little penguin words. I was, again, having a great time with my manual typewriter this morning. My manual typewriter has such a neat feel to that font, and I just love it. I think it just adds so much to my layouts because of the fact that a lot of the type is not consistent, and I am still learning how to type hard enough with it. It's definitely an exercise for the hands working on a manual typewriter. You don't realize how easy it is to work off of the technology you have now until you try the old stuff. And so for this one, I from the Where to Next collection, I had cut out this camera. This one I actually stamped with the Where to Next stamp set and added ink. These are leftover embellishments from another project that I did. So I have included the card in the corner if you are interested in seeing that video on how I went through all the steps to figure out how to cut out my cameras and add them to a page. And then I'm going to just add my journaling as well too. These things don't have to be crazy complicated, but it is fun to add some of these embellishments and add some variety to these pages. I've learned that just because it's paper doesn't mean it can't be an embellishment or something else. I love creating embellishments out of things that maybe they weren't originally meant for that, but I love being able to kind of customize them the way that works for me and how I like to create. For me, whether or not I'm adding photos in or I'm just working in my journal, my art journal, I find the journaling part is really important to me. I think it's important that we record our thoughts, our feelings, and just like our impressions from the things we experience in our lives. It feels like life goes by so quickly, and I feel like if I don't write it down, things fade over time, and I think it's really good for the sake of getting to know ourselves, for being able to find that personal self-expression, being able to take advantage of these moments just to pause and enjoy and remember some of these beautiful moments that we have. I find sometimes it helps to stay grounded when things aren't always going well, because you can go back and go, you know what? At this moment, things are maybe not great, but they have been awesome and they have been wonderful, and not to forget about that. And so to finish this off, I'm going to add in a front cover and a back cover. I wanted to actually cover the whole thing. For this one, I took a saying out of the Where to Next collection: let your feet wander, your eyes marvel, and your soul ignite. And whether or not you're traveling overseas or just even in your own city, it's one of those things of there's so many beautiful things to see and to remember and to enjoy if we just give ourselves new eyes and the time and just the pause to remember them and to enjoy them. I'll be honest, this book got a little bit thicker than I originally planned. It's funny how you add all those layers of paper and things kind of take on a life of their own, but it's not a bad thing. I'm actually really liking this design, and this book will actually stand up on itself really nicely, so it's going to be great to just display somewhere. And then for the front cover, I'm going to add a few more things. In this case, I wanted to keep the cover fairly simple, so what I'm going to do is actually, I again took some paper from the Child at Heart collection and the Where to Next collection and just added them together. I find those two collections actually work really quite well color-wise together. Just line that up really nicely. And then I didn't bother coloring in any of the penguins. Again, they're pretty black and white. Yeah, I could maybe added a bit of color to them, but I thought it may be fun just to leave them as very kind of graphical images. And I purposely am letting the little wings just go over the sides a little bit. And now I'm going to add this onto the front of the little mini book. Keep that nice and centered. And then I'm going to add in, again, more of my typewriter type, which is Penguin Walk. And looks like I can get a couple of them in. Okay, so there you can see we have our little book finished. So again, like the front page, some journaling, some photos. This is a great way to also use up a lot of your paper scraps. Again, the little haiku and some more photos. And then again, more journaling. And a beautiful quote. And so you can see that you can make these fun little tiny books. And this one's going to stand up on its own. So it's going to be perfect for just putting on display somewhere. And to be able to enjoy and just have some memories from a really good day that I had. So I hope you've enjoyed this little mini book project. There's so many ways you can use these mini books just in your work or in your creative practice. You don't have to always be using them for creating albums or adding photos or papers. You can use them just as a little journal, a place to add your quotes, a place to add poetry or haikus. That was one of the things that I like using them for. There's lots of ways you can use these books, and because they're so easy to make and really to scale them up or down is just dependent on the size of paper you cut. So it's a really easy design. It doesn't require a lot of thought or measurement. It is a great way of just trying something else in your creative practice. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, if you could like it and subscribe to my channel. It means a lot to me that you follow along and that you have interest in what I'm sharing with you today. Also, there's my website, hopalongstudio.com. There I have other ideas on self-care as well as written instructions and photographs for each of these tutorials that I share every week on YouTube. Also, if you are interested in any of the Well Whisper Designs products, use DT Nadine at checkout. That will give you 10% off of your order. So I hope you have a really great week, and I will see you next time.